Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well this morning. So we're going to have a talk by Caine, Caine Barlow, and it's going to be on Amanita muscaria, which is probably the world's most well-known mushroom. It's the red and white topped toadstool that is all in all cartoons and Mario and whatnot. And, Caine's going to be talking about some of the misconceptions around it that have popped up regarding its toxicity. And so, for those who don't know Caine, who haven't seen any of his talks here or haven't seen him before, Caine's a fungal educator, a mycologist. He's based in Melbourne, and he started foraging for mushrooms in the early 90s, started growing them and cultivating them in 2000s. And he has worked with many organisations, including EGA, Entheogenesis Australis. He writes for Double Blind, Third Wave, Microdose, Healing Maps, and he's currently writing a book. So, written. All right.
Thank you, Lee. Yes, and thank you to the organisers of MardiGrass for having me here today. Just to put this in context, last year I did a talk on the psilocybin-containing fungi of Australia. I did a similar talk last night, but last year, during the Q&A was fairly well dominated by questions around Amanita muscaria. So I thought I'll pose a potential talk to MardiGrass, and they were like, yeah, let's talk about Amanita muscaria. Amanita muscaria seems to be really popular at the moment. It's been gaining lots of attention. There's lots of people talking about it. There's lots and lots of questions about how to use it, how to dose with it. So I thought I would kind of talk a little bit about like the ethnomycology of it, and then to kind of dive into a little bit of the harm reduction and a little bit of the chemistry. I don't have slides with me, so you're going to have to bear with my memory, which is not fantastic. Okay, Amanita muscaria is otherwise known as the fly agaric. It's the red and white dotted toadstool. It's the archetypal magic mushroom. It has an incredible lineage that goes back, thousands of years, millennia, way back into the past. It's such an incredibly beautiful mushroom. It's, like you're wandering around the pine forest and here's this bright red mushroom. How can you not notice it? How can you not perhaps kind of start to form a mythology about this mushroom that just suddenly appears out of nowhere? Is this bright red colour. It's this magical appearance, and so we've developed this kind of culture around it. The difference between a toadstool and a mushroom is essentially a toadstool is something that's kind of poisonous, it's icky, it's it's the thing that your parents tell you not to touch. And I guess it's kind of like the toad. Don't touch the toad. It's a lot of toadstools are represented as. It is a derogatory term. Yeah. We're brought up with this archetype of toadstool as this mushroom with this kind of goopy, gelatinous layer on top. It's unpleasant to touch, and it could potentially be poisonous. And I guess this is the thing about the Amanita muscaria, is it has this cultural association with it being a poisonous mushroom. Don't touch it, it's deadly, it'll kill you. Ideas like this that we're starting to kind of take apart, and the narrative around that is changing. There's lots of people who have really are working very, very hard to change the narrative around that. But there is a little bit of truth to that, and I will cover that in a little bit of detail. Not a lot, but a little.
What does that name mean, Amanita?
What does it mean? So Amanita, I think it's named after the Amita mountains in Turkey. or something like that. But muscaria comes from musca, meaning fly. So because the fly agaric, based on the name, the fly agaric has been used traditionally as a way of killing flies. So you would have a glass of milk or water, and you would drop fragments of the mushroom into the milk, water solution, and the flies would be attracted to it, and then would be stunned by the toxins within the mushroom cap, and then die. So hence this name fly agaric. There are people who will then make stretches to talk about how it was perhaps more based on witchcraft, the whole kind of idea of, you know, the fly being a cultural association with devils, and hence this kind of interesting association. But I think it's really based on that kind of milk mushroom traditional use. So the fly agaric, Amanita, so just to describe it, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but it starts out as this beautiful little egg-shaped kind of primordia. It grows in association with pine trees. It's a temperate mushroom. It forms in the soil as the little egg. And there's a whole lot of kind of cultural mythology around that as well, associations with Easter, etc. But it starts as an egg, it grows, it breaks open its universal veil, and then expands. So it starts out as a globose mushroom, breaks, pushes up, becomes semi-hemispherical, and then in times kind of spreads out, and in some cases even turns up. So, yes, it's mycorrhizal, so it grows in association with pine trees. So if you're looking for it, go find a pine plantation, or just a pine tree in a park, and you might find one. There was one seen recently. We were hoping to grab it so I could have one to display today, but it disappeared. So whoever grabbed it, I hope they had fun. So I'm just going to have a drink of tea. Oh, sure, that sounds good. I guess one of the things about Amanita muscaria in Australia, though, is it's an introduced species here. It's a weed species. Because it grows in association with pine, a lot of pine trees are weeds here as well. So wherever pine spread, the Amanita muscaria spread as well. It's also known to be jumping into other forest types here in Australia and in other places, New Zealand and Chile as well. It's jumping onto the native Nothofagus species, which is a little bit of a concern to mycologists because it may then be pushing out some of the native species. So where in Tasmania it grows, near the Nothofagus, there's kind of like a park with a few pine trees and oak trees, and it grows in this park at Malfield National Park, and you can wander around, and there's muscaria everywhere. You're then driving up the mountain and walking into the Nothofagus, so people are spreading the spores into the forest, and it's becoming a bit of a problem.
Mycorrhizal with the beech trees.
It's becoming mycorrhizal with the...
Taken in with the feet, do they think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's just going to soil.
That's right. Germinates, grows, forms an association. And because they're so weedy and they've developed such a healthier relationship with the trees, then it stops the other mycorrhizal fungi from forming that relation.
Any effects of the trees itself yet?
Well, I would assume it probably doesn't actually affect the tree so much because the tree is still getting what it wants from the relationship. Yes. There are rumours of it also jumping onto eucalyptus trees, and that's where also another concern is it if it forms a relationship with the eucalyptus, we're then expecting it to be able to then spread out into Eucalyptosaurus, and it'll be everywhere. Yeah. I don't know. I'm sure like if you go to Tasmania or Victoria and you drive around, you'll come across these pine trees, and they're almost a blanket of mushrooms. They're certainly not rare, and they're quite a pest. Temperate, yes. Yes, but it does get cold enough up here for it to be able to fruit. Probably not near the coast so much, but certainly up here. Like, it's cool enough up here for them to be able to grow. And I've picked them up in southeast Queensland as well, in some of the pine forests that are inland, like a couple of hours inland. So I don't think they do have an association with the native conifers. No. Yeah, again, there would be the similar problem. So, yeah.
I was in Wick-up from Orange, and I foraged edible mushrooms in the pine forest there.
Yeah.
And this time last week I was in the forest and there was Amanita.
Yep.
And there is every year.
Mm-hmm.
They come up in the same spots every year. So
yep.
Because they're always in that spot in the forest.
Yeah. So you'll know what I mean then by the fact that, like they're just,
Like
when they come up, they come up everywhere.
Evolution.
Yep.
Bulbous to being very flat and dark.
Yeah.
Which trees are they with there?
Sorry?
Which trees are they with there?
Radiata pine.
Radiata
They're
pine,
state pine. It's a novel state forest.
Yeah. Which is an introduced tree here. Yeah, it's introduced.
I heard you're not supposed to pick them and have them in your car.
Well, that's a point I'm going to get onto. Is with the harm reduction stuff, is being careful with that. So, in terms of mythology, Amanita muscaria is talked about in a variety of different senses. This, like, we all grew up with Alice in Wonderland, and apparently Lewis Carroll went off to, I think it was the Bodleian Library, and there's a copy of The Seven Sisters of Sleep by Mordecai Cook, and apparently when that copy was reported afterwards, is that the only part of the book that had actually been cut open, the way they printed the books in kind of the late 1800s, was they printed these books on these massive sheets. And sometimes you had to cut the pages to be able to then read the book. But the only pages that were cut were the particular chapter on Amanita muscaria. And there's a record of Lewis Carroll having been there and spent a whole day reading this book. So there's a fairly good indication that Alice in Wonderland is based on Amanita muscaria and some of the effects that then come about from that. And it's noted that Amanita muscaria, one of the effects is this change in perception of growing smaller and then also growing larger. And even in some of the references, the ethnomycological references from Siberia, is talking about, shamans really struggling with trying to move around, and this sense of they're seeing things around them as being massive. So it's kind of an interesting side note. Then what else? It's also been quite popular because of after Gordon Wasson had published his Life magazine article, a lot of people kind of didn't necessarily follow up on the psilocybe stuff, but they kind of, because there's this archetype of fairies and gnomes being associated with Amanita muscaria, this kind of magical element, a lot of researchers went chasing after Amanita muscaria as being one of the particularly kind of important psychoactive mushrooms, with the magic mushroom seeker, making kind of all these claims around how Egyptians had been using Amanita muscaria and other groups. They're kind of slightly unfounded, but it led to then this fascination during the 60s of the Amanita muscaria as being the main magic mushroom, and kind of culminating in Jefferson Airplane's song of "Feed Your Head," and these references again back to Alice in Wonderland. And those of you who have seen Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas will be aware of that particular scene, the bathtub scene, where I think he's eaten a whole sheet of acid, and it's just like, throw the radio in at the peak into the bathtub. So, to the sounds of Feed Your Head. But then there's also been this kind of association too with Gordon Wasson looking into Hindu belief systems and trying to make the argument that Soma, who was in the Rig Veda, and that whole thing is so psychoactive anyway, is that Soma is actually the Amanita muscaria. It's this personification of this particular god. Even making hints to some of the shamanic practices of urinating in cups and then passing around the urine for everyone to drink. So, and I'll get back to that in a little bit. And then a little bit more recently, then we've also got the one-up mushroom that's in Mario Brothers, and I think many of us kind of spent a lot of time chasing that little mushroom so to get through the game. So then a little bit of harm reduction, and I think this kind of was raised by you, was that Amanita muscaria in Australia is actually a Schedule 9 mushroom. It contains muscimol. Muscimol is a Schedule 9 substance, and because of our container laws, it then means that the Amanita muscaria is illegal. I very much doubt that they'd probably pull you up on it, but it's probably a good idea to know. Beyond that, there's then the whole kind of pharmacological aspect of Amanita muscaria. So there are three main compounds found in Amanita muscaria. There's muscarine, muscimol, and ibotenic acid. Muscarine was the first compound that was identified in Amanita muscaria, and I think it was in 1869, and through whatever reasons, it was the compound that was associated as being the psychoactive compound. Muscarine at high doses is actually toxic and deadly, and hence kind of this association with it being poisonous. Amanita muscaria itself is not very high in muscarine, and there's probably more concerns with muscarine in other psychoactive fungi, so like the psychoactive Caine and the psychoactive Inosebes, I think, from memory. Some of those contain really, really high levels of muscarine, and so if you're out foraging and you're, or probably even more case looking for psilocybes, and you pick the wrong little brown mushroom, you might get a case of muscarine poisoning.
So we talked about different types of mushrooms.
Yes, yes. Amanita muscaria itself, I think it's somewhere in the range of 0.0002% muscarine, and that's only in some of the different varieties. So there's a few different varieties of Amanita muscaria. There is Amanita muscaria var muscaria. That's the European Amanita muscaria, and that's probably likely the one that we have here in Australia. In North America, there's Amanita muscaria var flavivulvata, and that does have quite a bit of muscarine in it, but still not at a level that's going to be toxic to most people. And then there's
Easily identify both of those torches.
Amanita muscaria is bright red. It's like it's really, really bright red. And the American one is not as red. It has more of an orange tone to the cap, to the colour. And then there's another one, Amanita muscaria var Gessoii, and that's the yellow. Amanita. So, but we don't get that here.
How do they compare with our Australian common magic mushroom? The blue top.
Well, that's a good point.
What, like...
Well, Amanita muscaria is not psychedelic. It is not psychedelic. It is more correctly referred to as a dissociative. Dissociative. It's not at high doses. It's not a pleasant state. You essentially kind of go into a delirium. Actually, it's not dissociative. It's a delirium. So you fall into a delirium. You can potentially have convulsions, etc. So yeah, it's not recommended to go for those higher doses. So what was I talking about?
Well, you were doing the different colours of it.
Yeah, the different colours. I'm not sure about the pharmacology of Gasoi though. I haven't looked into it honestly, because it's not something that we're finding here in Australia. So we only have muscaria. We may in some cases have flavivolata, but I'm not sure. I haven't really seen anything that would indicate that. Getting back to the pharmacology, sorry. Oh yes. Oh, I've moved on from that. Sorry. But then the other important compounds in Amanita muscaria is ibotenic acid, which is then the prodrug for muscimol. And muscimol is the psychoactive compound. And they worked this out during the 1960s when they were doing a reassessment of the pharmacology of Amanita muscaria. And so there's a whole heap of really, really lovely papers that came out in the late 60s, particularly I think with the ethnopharmacological conference that happened in 1969. There's a beautiful book, it's as a PDF, and I highly recommend Googling it and finding it. It's a good read. But ibotenic acid is the primary compound that's found in the mushroom as a fresh mushroom. It is regarded as being poisonous and toxic, but a lot of the studies that kind of point to it as being toxic are based on kind of using really, really high concentrations of ibotenic acid and using it in cell cultures to then to be able to kind of cause mutations in cells. So yes, it does have this action, but also it's not at that higher concentration within the mushroom. If you do eat the fresh mushroom, you will probably get quite sick, and will probably cause probably some stimulation and some unpleasant effects. I think ibotenic acid acts on the NMDA receptors, and it is quite stimulating. So as a fresh mushroom, but there's also all these other kind of neurological kind of effects that you're going to get that are unpleasant. It's worth pointing out too.
Have you ever eaten one before?
Yeah, I'm happy to out myself, yes. I have. I'll come back to that. It is worth pointing out that Amanita muscaria is potentially deadly at high doses because it's, psilocybe mushrooms are fairly safe. You can actually eat quite a lot. It's not going to make you sick. It's not poisonous. You might have an overwhelming effect. But in that sense, Amanita muscaria is definitely not worth doing with that. There are now news reports coming out that someone recently was in a coma for a few days. Someone else has recently died, and there's a couple of historical cases of people who have died from eating Amanita muscaria. So Yeah, fresh and dried. So, you know, but we're talking up in the level of like 7 beyond caps. Traditionally, from shamanic groups, their recommendation was 3 caps. And that's it. You know, you don't do any more than 3 large caps. So, the full mushroom cap.
Can I ask another question? Do you get, a long-term effect if you microdose it for a number of months? Can you get a build-up? Is it dangerous?
I would say probably not. No. So dinner plate sized, probably. I don't know. There are different sizes of dinner plates, aren't there? Probably that. About the size of your hand. Yeah, that would be probably as large as I would call large. You know, I mean, you do see them bigger. So, yeah. So that's ibotenic acid. It is a problematic compound. Ibotenic acid is the prodrug for muscimol. And then there's this whole process of decarboxylation. So you need to decarboxylate your Amanita muscaria if you're thinking about consuming them. Ah, awesome. Yeah, wow. Okay, Amanita muscaria. Beautiful red mushroom with these beautiful white spots. I imagine that would have been a reasonably large mushroom. Oh, okay. Yep. So, right. So, in terms of preparing Amanita muscaria, yeah, you need to decarboxylate these. So, muscarine is an agonist for GABA receptors. But it's also possibly a couple of other receptors. I guess they're still working on this. Cracker dry? Yeah, I've heard about this. Yeah. There are different ways of decarboxylating Amanita muscaria. Traditionally, one of the ways of doing it is simply just sun drying it. And there are papers that describe then sun drying it over different time periods. So, like sun drying for a couple of days is okay, but sun drying for about a week is probably the ideal time. And then people also oven dry, but it seems from the literature I've read, and I do want to chase this up with people who probably know a little bit more about the chemistry of it than I do, that heating it over time does actually break down the muscimol as well. So even though you are decarboxylating the mushroom, you are degrading some of the muscimol.
What about drying it into a bag in the fridge?
That may well work. Yes, I mean, you want to be able to heat them as well. Like part of sun drying is like they are actually being heated while they're in. Yeah, you want to dehydrate them. Yeah, you can use a dehydrator. So. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Someone said air fryer. That's an interesting idea. So there's decarboxylating using traditional methods like sun drying and heating. So so oven or dehydrator. Then there's also other traditional methods such as, like your body. Your body does decarboxylate some part of that ibotenic acid, and hence why the descriptions of ibotenic acid is a little confusing, because part of the effect of the ibotenic acid is also then it's the muscimol having an effect as well. But traditionally the shaman or someone in the tribe would consume the mushrooms and then would urinate them out, or urinate out the muscimol, and then everyone else would consume that. Probably not something we'd want to do today. I know some people are into that, but I'm not. But then there was also stories of the reindeers consuming the the reindeers consuming the Amanita muscaria, and apparently they would fight each other to get access to the mushrooms. And someone did ask about whether I'd eaten them and what they taste like. They are delicious. Fry them up with a little bit of garlic, and they're really nice. And there is a whole culture of people eating Amanita muscaria. There's a beautiful paper by co-authored by David Aurora, American mycologist, talking about how in Russia they would eat the Amanita muscaria. Typically, though, the recipe is that you boil them like 3 times and pour off the water to get rid of the ibotenic acid and the muscimol, and they would then just eat the mushroom as is. So,
is there any other medicinal benefits besides?
I'll get to that. Yeah. Then a little bit more recently, there's been some papers coming out about other ways of decarboxylating, and one of the really popular methods is people boiling the Amanita muscaria in a liquid at around about a pH of 2.7 for about 150 minutes, and that pretty well completely decarboxylates all the ibotenic acid. But it's in a liquid, so you then have to decide how you're going to deal with that liquid. I guess you can just drink it as is, but there's also a whole community of people who then are going on and making tinctures and extracts and notably also gummies. Because we have this Schedule 9 classification in Australia, we don't have the kind of interesting commercial aspect that's popping up in the United States, where apparently in the States you can drive into, you can go into head shops or even in kind of some stores like on the highway where you stop and get your petrol. They're selling like little capsules of gummies. Some gummies have Amanita muscaria, but also it's been reported that a lot of the gummies don't. They just have 4-ACO-DMT or psilocybin. So a lot of the reports that you're getting from people in the United States about how amazing Amanita muscaria is actually kind of misapplied. It's actually just psilocybin or psilocin that people are talking about, which is kind of interesting. And yeah, it's certainly in the States where there's this whole kind of fascination for Amanita muscaria, microdosing it is coming from. So now, traditional use. Someone asked about the traditional use, and there's a beautiful book on fly agaric edited by Kevin Feeney, and it has some of the really notable papers in it that have come out lately. And he goes into how people have traditionally used Amanita muscaria to treat things like Parkinson's disease, but also arthritis or other muscle issues. So people are known to have been making well, try not to. Making salves using the Amanita muscaria to then rub onto your joints to, ease some of your muscle pains. My understanding is it's fairly stable. It's fairly stable, but then I do question that because of that particular paper that I was reading, where with the drying using heat, that there was a lot of muscimol that seemed to be missing. So I would say it's shelf stable. Probably if you keep it cool in a dark place, it would probably be fine. But it certainly seems that muscimol breaks down with heat. Probably, I would say so. Yeah. So I don't know. I have not ever stored a bag of Amanita muscaria and come back a couple of years later and sampled it. I don't know. Does anyone else? Does anyone have any anecdotal knowledge on that? Or no? Okay, we'll leave it at that.
I dry a lot of mushrooms, and after I've dried them, I find that again, these are culinary mushrooms, but I then cure them for 12 months in glass jars.
Yeah.
Away from heat, away from light, and I find quite a strong difference between freshly dehydrated mushrooms and what I call cured mushrooms. I can understand the process.
More flavour.
Yeah, more flavour, bigger, more umami flavour. So you can't make a comparison. They're very different things. You cure a mushroom like you cure tobacco
Or marijuana.
or whatever. But if you cure it correctly, you'll get a different dimension of flavour.
Yep.
I know this is about other things, but in terms of drying something out, I can't see how that would be different.
Yeah, I would assume that's probably the same. It's really depending on what you're after.
Mushrooms are very stable.
Yeah.
You've taken the right amount of moisture out of them. They last for years. Chinese and there's many cultures.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, I've had packets of shiitake sitting around for years, and you know, when they're stored properly, you can then take them out, and they still have this beautiful umami. Yeah. And as I mentioned, like, I don't know if you tried personally, but you know, like these have an incredible umami. So I would imagine if you've processed them properly for culinary uses, that yeah,
Russians
they
and
would.
the Japanese would work with these a lot to want to just eat them as a mushroom.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's flesh out that concept of umami.
Umami is just like this beautiful kind of salty, almost kind of meaty flavour that comes through from the mushrooms. I feel probably the best example is like porcini, like dried out and properly cured porcini. You know, when you start to cook with it, it has just this beautiful umami. Shiitake does as well. Yeah, I don't know if you agree.
No.
Yeah, okay.
I'm mainly doing saffron caps and slippery jacks.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. You had a question?
Yeah. Is it okay to eat the stem versus the cap with muscaria? Because I've heard conflicting stories.
Okay, all right. Okay, so if you're going to collect the muscaria, one thing to make sure of is it's not full of gnats, because they do get really gnat-ridden and wormy. Probably best to pick the younger specimens. You know, I've come across little groups and they're just all filled full of gnats and fungus gnats and worms. Yeah, you know, you don't want to eat that. So, I would probably just remove the stem though. The stem's hollow. It's not very fibrous. It's really all in the cap. So, and chemical studies of the mushroom as well have found that the caps have a much higher concentration of the ibotenic acid anyway. So you would then imply that the cap also has more muscimol, and there's a lot less in the stem. Now, someone asked then about microdosing. So based then on Russian kind of experience, I would say microdosing is probably fine long term. But the point being is as long as it's been properly prepared and decarboxylated. So yeah, no, you want to treat the mushroom properly to then be able to get rid of all the ibotenic acid. So your body does break down the ibotenic acid. I can't imagine it being something that your body's going to build up. If you're microdosing, I would assume that your body is going to process that. But it's best just to get rid of it.
I do know someone who microdoses every day.
Amanita muscaria?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're healthy.
Yep. Yep. No, but it seems to be from Russian literature that there's definitely benefits for using Amanita muscaria, and it's something that I want to investigate as well.
So you don't know what benefits?
It helps with sleep. Yeah, it helps with sleep. It helps with if you have tremors. It relaxes. Well, it's a GABA agonist, so it kind of relaxes your nerve system. So yeah. So it helps with tremors. It's been regarded as being good. Possibly, yeah. Yeah. Yep. So I think like a lot of tremors are from that. You know, like it's an overactive fight and flight response. Yeah. It's something I've looked into because I have kind of a slight tremor. So, you know, it gets a little annoying, and it's just like, well, I'd like to calm down a little bit to stop that.
And does that work? Does that work for you?
I haven't microdosed Amanita muscaria. I have not been in a position to be able to collect enough to be able to consume on a regular basis microdosing.
Can I ask another question? Can you seed an area to grow?
Can
you seed it, like use the spores in the soil in an area to like facilitate growth?
yes, you could. Yes, I'm going to say yes to that, but also Amanita muscaria is not a rare mushroom. You know, it's a weed. It is, I think, officially classified as a weed. If you go around to enough pine forest, because of my own personal situation where I was travelling a lot between places, I wasn't in a position to be able to pick them and properly prepare them. Also, you know, like, my mum probably would have really nagged me. Martin, you had a question.
I just voice a slight note of caution because muscaria elixir agonists, if people are microdosing regularly, they're actually getting a calming effect and a noticeable effect, which is sort of slightly against the whole idea of microdosing. As a GABA agonist, then it actually acts in a similar way to benzodiazepines, but some of the things which are reinforcing, there's a potential if you get to burn too much, potentially that you might have trouble starting to cut back.
Yeah, and that is another way that it's been used is for people who are trying to get off benzos, is that they will then start to replace the benzos with the Amanita muscaria, but then they will wean themselves off.
The other thing is the muscarine is also an agonist of the muscarinic acetylcholine receptor, and that's probably got something to do with its sort of hyperactivity, physical hyperactivity.
Yep.
Aspects as well, higher doses. So just consider those as
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry to get all dirty.
No, I appreciate that. I'm missing my slides, so I kind of don't have some of those details with me at the moment.
Do they grow in separate conditions, and don't they need a pine forest?
You're going to need a pine forest or a pine tree. Bare minimum is a pine tree. But also birch. They will grow in birch, pine, spruce. They're the main kind of 3 European trees. But it's pine trees is the main one. So I know there are pine forests up around here, and you know, like I've seen enough radiata pine around to know that if it gets cool enough, they should grow here.
So when are they particularly harvested? Like is it winter?
And now the season is now. Yeah, they're an autumn fruiting mushroom. They can then reappear at the end of it's in spring, like at the end of winter. So that transition back into kind of warmer temperatures. They're typically autumn, but they can reappear in springtime if you get the right cold drops. I'm not so sure about the native pines. They're an introduced species. They've definitely taken advantage of Nothofagus in Tasmania. There are some Nothofagus up here as well, so yeah, I've not heard about any issues though with those particular forests. So, right. Being from Tasmania and Victoria, I'm not familiar with. Yeah, okay.
Oricaria.
Right, okay. I don't have any records of them growing in association with those. So, and also because it's a weed species, I don't necessarily want to encourage people to experiment. You know, and
it's not ethical to be introducing them to
no, it's not.
when they're already becoming invasive.
Yep.
As an exotic invasive.
Absolutely. So I'm kind of half one way and half the other. It's like I'm fascinated by Amanita muscaria. They're one of my favourite mushrooms, but also they're an absolute pest in some places in Tasmania. I've, you know, turned up to places and they're just carpeted everywhere on the edge of native forest where the pine trees are growing, and it's quite a concern.
How do they impact the environment?
Well, the pine trees are a pest to begin with. So the pine trees are then just taking up room that, you know, native plants should be growing, and then the Amanita muscaria are then displacing the native fungi that should be growing within that area. So I don't know. Perhaps people who are interested in Amanita muscaria, you're actually kind of doing the environment a little bit of a favour by going collecting them. So. Look, talking about Amanita muscaria is a little bit of a controversial topic. You'll get people who get really fired up about how much of a pest and how much of a weed they are, and how much we just need to do our best to try to remove them from our environment. But also then they have this kind of interesting cultural association and potential medicinal benefits if we can change how we use them. Yeah, a little bit more detail. Well, they're essentially forming associations with a tree that then is, and through that association they're spreading, and then they're pushing out the endemic species. Endemic species then struggle with, you know, these really, really healthy, vigorous species that don't have any other pests that feed on them or grow in competition with them. They land here, they don't have their native competitors, and they don't have their native animals, etc., that do feed on them. I don't know. Have any of you seen that beautiful photo of the fox? You know, the fox that comes along and is eating the mushrooms. Some animals can eat them and they don't necessarily then get a toxic effect.
I see bites out of Amanita all the time.
Yeah. Well,
I think kangaroos may also.
Quite possibly have an adventitious feed, and then we'll kind of just go yes or no. Yeah, I know.
Then be spread through the scat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, an animal will try to feed on the mushroom, and regardless whether it likes it or not, it will then shit out the spores somewhere else, and the mushrooms are spread that way. It's kind of how fungi are spread a lot in the environment. I know there are mycologists in Victoria who are trying to set up now cameras in locations to be able to actually track what animals are eating. So that would probably be an interesting study in itself, like what animals are going into the forest and eating on the Amanita muscarias. So, yeah, so, you know, but hence also my example of the Mountfield National Park, where there's all these European trees at the base of the park. People are wandering around eating their sandwiches in amongst all the mushrooms that are spored, Amanita muscaria spores everywhere. They're getting on your shoes. You're then driving up into the mountains and wandering through the monophagus, and you're just spreading spores everywhere. So it's a problem. It's something that we do very, very easily as animals, and fungi take advantage of us. I've seen it even with psilocybes. You know, they will turn up because the spore's getting on your shoes and you're just spreading spores around everywhere. So, yes. But Amanita muscaria are considered a pest, and some people would also recommend that if you're hanging around them, clean your shoes with alcohol after being around them, so you're not spreading spores into other forests. Any other questions? No? How are we for time?
We've got about 10-15 minutes.